I still wake up screaming, my hands clutching at the air, trying to forget the feeling of those cold, severed fingers wrapping around my wrist in the dark. Brother Nathaniel's hands, they were nailed to the offering box when we found his body. But that night, in the catacombs beneath St. Dominic's monastery, I watched those same hands crawl across the stone floor toward me, dragging something behind them. Something that was still breathing. The worst part, when I finally looked at what they were offering me, I recognized my own face staring back, mouth open in a silent scream that hadn't happened yet. Before we descend into the darkness together, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. You're going to want to follow this channel after what I'm about to tell you. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Are you alone? Is it dark where you are? Good. Keep the lights off. This story demands it. What I'm about to share with you isn't fiction. These are the translated pages from a journal found in the ruins of what historians believed was St. Dominic's Monastery in the Massachusetts wilderness. The author's name was never confirmed. The journal ends abruptly. No body was ever recovered. This is his story. My name is irrelevant now, though I remember my mother calling it out across the fields of our farm when I was a boy. That life feels like someone else's memory, faded and distant as morning fog over the river. What matters is that in the autumn of 1774, I came to St. Dominic's Monastery seeking redemption for sins I'd rather not name, and I found something far worse than damnation. The monastery sat deep in the Massachusetts wilderness, 3 days' ride from the nearest settlement. Even the Wampanoag tribes avoided this land, though they wouldn't tell me why. I should have listened to the warning in their silence. The trees grew wrong there, twisted and bare even in autumn, their branches reaching toward the sky like arthritic fingers frozen in prayer or perhaps in desperate pleading. Brother Thomas met me at the gate. He was a gaunt man with eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me, as if I were already a ghost. There were only 7 monks at St. Dominic's, he told me, though the monastery had been built to house 50. The others had moved on to other callings, he said, but the way his hand trembled as he made the sign of the cross told me a different story. The monastery itself was a severe stone structure, all hard angles and narrow windows that seemed designed to keep something out rather than let light in. A bell tower rose from the center like an accusing finger pointed at God. The bell never rang the entire time I was there. Later, I learned why. Brother Thomas led me through corridors lit by sputtering candles that cast more shadow than light. The walls were adorned with paintings of saints in various stages of martyrdom, Saint Sebastian pierced with arrows, Saint Lawrence burning on his gridiron, Saint Bartholomew holding his own flayed skin. But there was one painting that stopped me cold. It depicted a monk I didn't recognize, kneeling in prayer, his hands severed at the wrists and placed before him like an offering. Beneath it, a brass plate read, Brother Nathaniel the Penitent, he who gave all. We don't speak of Brother Nathaniel, Thomas whispered, noticing my gaze. Especially not after dark. He showed me to my cell, a sparse room containing only a wooden cot, a writing desk, and a crucifix that hung crooked on the wall. No matter how many times I straightened it, I would return to find it tilted at that same unsettling angle, as if invisible hands had deliberately moved it back. That first night, I heard the chanting. It started around midnight, a low murmuring that seemed to come from beneath the floor. I pressed my ear to the cold stone and could make out words in Latin, a prayer I didn't recognize. The rhythm was all wrong, too fast, almost frantic, punctuated by long silences that somehow felt worse than the chanting itself. I found Brother Thomas the next morning in the refectory, ladling thin gruel into wooden bowls. The other monks ate in silence, as was customary, but this was different. This was the silence of men who were afraid to speak, afraid that words might summon something they couldn't send away. I heard chanting last night, I said quietly. From below. Brother Thomas's hand froze mid-motion, gruel dripping slowly back into the pot. The other monks looked up as one, their spoons clattering against their bowls. In the corner, Brother William, the eldest, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, stood abruptly and left the room. I could hear his footsteps echoing down the hall, faster than a man his age should be able to move. The catacombs, Thomas finally said. Brother Nathaniel prayed there. Before what? But he wouldn't answer. None of them would. They returned to their breakfast, eating with mechanical precision, eyes fixed on their bowls as if the gruel contained secrets they needed to memorize. I spent that day exploring the monastery. It was a maze of corridors and empty rooms, each one colder than the last. In what had once been the library, I found the books burned to ash in their shelves, the stone blackened by fire that must have burned impossibly hot. Only one volume remained intact, shoved into a corner behind a loose stone. It was a journal, written in English rather than Latin, the handwriting deteriorating from careful script to frantic scrawling across its pages. But before I could examine the journal properly, Brother William appeared in the doorway. The old man's eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd been weeping, and his hands clutched at a rosary so tightly the wooden beads cut into his palms. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it calls to certain souls. The guilty ones. The desperate ones. Are you desperate, brother?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. William moved closer, and I could smell sickness on him, not physical illness, but something deeper, something that rotted the soul from within. Brother Nathaniel was desperate too. We all were, once. That's why we came to St. Dominic's. But desperation is like blood in the water. It attracts things. Old things. Things that were here long before the monastery, long before the Christians came with their crosses and their prayers. He sat down heavily on the floor beside me, his old bones creaking. For a long moment, he simply stared at his hands, turning them over and over as if seeing them for the first time, or perhaps for the last time. "Let me tell you about my hands," he said softly. "These hands killed a man. Not in war, not in self-defense. I killed him because he had something I wanted, a piece of land, nothing more. I invited him to dinner, got him drunk, and pushed him down the cellar stairs. Broke his neck. I told everyone it was an accident. I inherited the land. I prospered." His voice cracked, but I couldn't sleep. Every night, I felt his hands around my throat, even though he'd never touched me. I felt him pulling me down into darkness. I came here thinking God might forgive me if I gave up everything, my wealth, my comfort, my life. But God is silent in this place. Only the door speaks. And it says my hands are payment enough. "You don't have to do this," I said. "We can leave. Both of us. Tonight." William laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You still don't understand. The door doesn't just hold us here physically. It holds us spiritually. It knows our sins, feeds on them, grows strong from them. The more guilty you are, the tighter its grip. And I am so very guilty." He looked at me with ancient, tired eyes. "What did you do, brother? What sin brought you to this cursed place?" He pointed a trembling finger at the floor. "The Wampanoag told us stories, before they left this land forever. They spoke of a place where the earth opened up and swallowed a whole village, men, women, children, all gone in a single night. They said the survivors heard singing from beneath the ground for weeks afterward, singing and screaming, so mixed together you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. That was centuries ago," William continued. "But the hole is still there. We built the monastery on top of it. We thought we could sanctify the ground, redeem it with prayer and sacrifice. We were fools. You can't redeem a place like this. You can only feed it." Before I could respond, I felt it, a sudden, overwhelming pressure in my mind, like invisible fingers pressing against the inside of my skull. Images flooded my consciousness, memories I'd tried to bury. My sister's face. The fever that took her. The medicine I could have afforded but chose not to buy because I wanted to save the money for myself, for my own future. Her last words asking me why I hadn't helped her. "It's showing you, isn't it?" William whispered. "The door. It's showing you what you did. What you really are. That's how it works. It makes you see yourself clearly, without the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. And once you really see, you'll do anything to make it stop. Even offer your hands. Even feed yourself to elsewhere." The pressure in my head increased until I thought my skull would split open. I saw my sister dying, over and over, each death slightly different but always ending the same way, with her hand reaching for me, begging for help I refused to give. And in each memory, my hands were there, counting coins, holding them tight, choosing gold over blood. "Make it stop," I gasped, falling to my knees. "Only one way to make it stop," William said sadly. "The offering. Give what you used to sin, and the guilt goes away. That's the promise. That's what the door whispers. It's lying, of course. The guilt never goes away. It just changes form. But by the time you realize that, your hands are already gone, and you're crawling through elsewhere, searching for an absolution that doesn't exist." The pressure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving me gasping on the floor. William helped me to a sitting position, his touch gentle despite the trembling in his fingers. "You have a choice," he said. "A few more days, maybe a week, before the door's hold on you is complete. You can fight it, try to resist, but fighting only makes it worse. Or you can accept what's coming and prepare yourself for the offering. At least then you'll have some dignity in the end. There has to be another way, I said desperately. William shook his head. Brother Marcus thought so too. He was the youngest of us, barely 25 when he came here. Brilliant mind, studied theology at Harvard. He spent 2 years researching the door, trying to find a way to close it or destroy it. He found old texts, ancient rituals, spoke to every scholar and medicine man he could reach. He was so sure he'd discovered the answer. What happened to him? He tried to seal the door using a Wampanoag ritual he'd learned from a stolen manuscript. It required a blood sacrifice, his own blood. He cut himself and poured it into the cracks around the door, speaking the old words, calling on spirits that were old when the world was young. William's face darkened. The door opened wider than it ever had before. It reached out and took him in pieces. First his hands, then his arms, then the rest of him, one limb at a time. We heard him screaming in elsewhere for 3 days. And when his voice finally stopped, his hands crawled back out and added themselves to the collection. The door mocked us with them, made them wave at us like he was saying goodbye. I felt my hope dying. So there's no escape. No way to stop this. There might be one way, William said slowly. But it's never been tried. It's just a theory, something Brother Marcus wrote about before his failed ritual. He believed the door fed on guilt and desperation, yes, but also on isolation. It grows strong in places where people are alone with their sins, where shame keeps them silent. He thought that if someone could carry the truth out into the world, tell others what happens here, expose the door to light and witnesses, it might weaken it, maybe even close it. But you said the door won't let us leave. It won't let us leave because we've already offered it our hands, our guilt, our souls. We're bound to it. But you haven't made the offering yet. You're not fully claimed. If you could get past the physical barrier, past the hands that guard the forest, you might be able to escape. Take the journals. Tell the world. Bring people here, holy people, strong people, people who haven't been broken by their own sins. Maybe they could do what we can't. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? William smiled sadly. Because I'm an old man who killed for land and spent decades paying for it in the worst way possible. Because in 2 days, I'll have no hands left to help anyone with. And because maybe, just maybe, if someone escapes, if someone stops this, then all our suffering might mean something. It might save others from making the same choice we made. He stood up slowly, his joints popping. But I warn you, trying to escape will draw the door's attention. It will send everything it has to stop you. The hands, the monks who are already too far gone to be saved, maybe even Brother Nathaniel himself. If you choose this path, you'll be alone, hunted, and terrified. And there's no guarantee you'll succeed. What's the alternative? Stay here and lose my hands? Spend eternity reaching through that door, trying to drag others into my suffering? Yes, William said simply. That's exactly the alternative. Welcome to St. Dominic's, brother. Welcome to the place where the guilty come to pay, and the payment is never enough. He left me there, alone in the burned library with Nathaniel's journal in my hands. Through the window, I could see the sun setting, painting the twisted trees with blood-red light. Somewhere below, in the catacombs, the door was waiting. Hungry. Patient. Sure of its eventual victory. I had a choice to make. And only a few days to make it. I wanted to ask him more, but Brother Thomas appeared behind William, his face pale and drawn. Brother William, he said sharply. The abbot wants to see you. Now. William's expression crumbled into pure terror. No, he whimpered. Please, not yet. I'm not ready. My hands. I need my hands for a few more days. Just a few more. Thomas grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him from the room. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor, William's pleas fading into silence. I was left alone with the journal and a growing sense that I'd stumbled into something far more complex and terrible than I'd imagined. The entries were dated from 1769 to 1770. The author was Brother Nathaniel. I took the journal back to my cell and began to read as the afternoon light faded. What I discovered chilled me more than the autumn wind that whistled through the cracks in the stone. Brother Nathaniel had come to St. Dominic's much as I had, seeking redemption. But his sins, he wrote, were of such magnitude that ordinary penance wasn't enough. He needed to make a sacrifice that would pierce the very heavens and drag God's attention down to this forgotten corner of his creation. The early entries detailed increasingly extreme acts of self-mortification, fasting until his ribs showed through his skin, sleeping on broken glass, Hours spent kneeling on dried peas while holding heavy stones above his head. The other monks had tried to stop him, but Nathaniel was convinced that suffering was the only language God understood, that pain was prayer made flesh. Then the entries changed. "I have found it," Nathaniel wrote in shaking script. "In the deepest part of the catacombs, behind the wall that should not exist. The door. Not a door to somewhere else, but a door to elsewhere. I can hear it breathing. I can hear it promising. It says it will give me what God will not, absolution. All it asks in return is an offering, a showing of true commitment. It wants me to prove that I am willing to give everything." The next entry was dated 3 months later. The handwriting was nearly illegible. "I have done it. I took the axe from the woodshed and I held my hands upon the altar stone. I prayed for strength. I prayed for courage. I prayed for God to stop me. He did not. The axe was sharp. It took 2 blows for each wrist. I did not scream. I placed my hands before the door as an offering, and the door opened. God forgive me." The door opened, and what came through was not forgiveness. It wore my hands like gloves. It touched my face with my own fingers. It whispered promises in my own voice. It said I could have my redemption, but first, I must help it make its own offering. It needs hands, you see. So many hands. To reach through. To pull others close. To drag them to elsewhere, where all debts are paid in screams that last forever. The journal ended there. The final pages had been torn out, leaving only ragged edges. I sat in the growing dark, my own hands trembling as I held the journal. I should have left then. I should have run to the gate and never looked back. But I was a fool, and I was curious, and I still believed that understanding evil might protect me from it. Over the next 3 days, I learned the truth about St. Dominic's, piece by terrible piece. I discovered that the monastery operated on a cycle. Every 6 months, one of the monks would be called to the catacombs to make the offering. They drew lots using blessed stones marked with symbols I couldn't decipher. The one who drew the marked stone had 2 weeks to prepare himself spiritually for what was coming. 2 weeks to say goodbye to the use of his hands. 2 weeks before the axe fell and the door received its offering. Brother William had drawn the stone 3 days before I arrived. That's why he'd been weeping. That's why his hands shook so badly. He was counting down the hours until they would be taken from him. I learned this from Brother Peter, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and no hands at all. He found me in the chapel on the second night, sitting before the altar, trying to pray but finding no words. Peter sat beside me, his robes pinned up to hide his stumps, and told me everything. "It started with Brother Nathaniel," Peter said. "He was the first to make the offering voluntarily. Before him, this was just a monastery. Strict, yes. Remote, certainly. But not this. When Nathaniel found the door, when he cut off his own hands and fed them to elsewhere, something changed. The door woke up fully. And it was hungry." Peter's voice was eerily calm, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the systematic mutilation of holy men. "At first, we thought we could close it. We tried everything, prayers, holy water, burning sage, even bringing in a Wampanoag medicine man who took one look at the catacombs and ran screaming into the forest. Nothing worked. The door stayed open. And every month, something would happen. One of us would get sick, or have an accident, or go mad and throw himself from the bell tower." He paused, his face grave. "We realized the door needed to be fed regularly, or it would take what it wanted violently. So we made an arrangement. Every 6 months, one of us makes the offering. Hands for passage, flesh for time. And in exchange, the door stays satisfied. The rest of us get to live. But live as what?" I asked, horror and disgust warring in my voice. "As prisoners? As accomplices to this abomination?" Peter smiled sadly. "As survivors. That's all we are now. Survivors of our own desperation, our own need for redemption so strong that we walked into a trap we can never escape. The door won't let us leave, you see. We tried. Brother Marcus made it 5 miles into the forest before the hands found him. They dragged him back, screaming. We heard him screaming for 3 days before the door finally took him completely. And me? I whispered. Why am I here? Because the door called you, Peter said simply. It calls to those who carry guilt heavy enough to break them. It whispers through dreams and coincidences, through chance encounters and wrong turns on forest paths. You think you chose to come here, but the door chose you first. It's always hungry. 7 monks aren't enough to sustain it anymore. It wants more offerings. It wants fresh hands. That night, I tried to escape. I waited until the monastery fell silent, then crept down to the main gate. But when I tried to open it, my hands wouldn't obey me. They simply stopped working, hanging limp at my sides as if the muscles had forgotten their purpose. I watched in horror as my own fingers began to move independently, flexing and curling without my command, as if something else were testing them out, learning how they worked. The paralysis lasted only a minute, but the message was clear. The door already had a claim on me. My hands were no longer entirely my own. I stumbled back to my cell, tears streaming down my face, and that's when I found the second journal. Someone had slipped it under my door while I'd been trying to escape, a newer volume, the leather still supple, the pages recent. The handwriting was shaky but legible. It was Brother William's journal. He'd been documenting his last 2 weeks. Every entry was dated, counting down to his appointment with the axe. He wrote about his fear, his attempts to prepare himself spiritually, his growing certainty that what waited for him beyond the door was not salvation but something infinitely worse. But what chilled me most was his final entry, written just hours before. I see them now, even when I'm awake. The hands of all who came before. Brother Nathaniel's hands, Brother Marcus's hands, Brother Augustine's hands. They crawl through the walls. They gather in the corners. They're waiting for mine to join them. I understand now what Brother Nathaniel meant when he wrote that the offerings are never enough. The door doesn't want our hands as a sacrifice. It wants them as tools. Every pair of hands it collects makes it stronger, gives it more reach, more ability to pull others close. We're not feeding it. We're arming it. And when it has enough hands, enough reach, it will pull itself through completely. It will leave elsewhere behind and come here, to our world, and then everyone will make the offering. Every man, woman, and child on earth will give their hands to the door, and the screaming will last forever. God forgive us, we thought we were saving ourselves, but we've been helping it grow strong enough to devour everything. The journal fell from my numb fingers. In the distance, I heard the bell tower creak and groan, though no bell rang. And then I heard the chanting begin, not from below this time, but from all around me, as if the monastery itself had learned the prayer and was reciting it through the stone. I knew what was happening. They were preparing William for his offering. And tomorrow night, when the moon was dark, they would take him down to the catacombs, and the door would claim another pair of hands. Unless I could stop them. Unless I could find a way to close the door permanently, to end this cycle before it claimed anyone else. Before it claimed me. I spent the entire next day searching the monastery for anything that might help, old texts, ritual objects, some clue about the door's origin or weakness. In a locked cabinet in what had once been the abbot's office, I found a leather-bound volume written in Latin. My Latin was poor, but I could make out enough to understand the basic content. It was the original monastery's record book, dating back to 1742, when St. Dominic's was first established. The founding abbot, a Jesuit named Father Cristobal, had written extensively about the site's history. According to his research, the Wampanoag called this place Watsika, the hole that hungers. It had been a place of sacrifice for them, but not to any god they worshipped. It was a place of banishment. When someone committed an unforgivable crime, when their guilt was so profound that it poisoned the community, they were brought to Watsika and thrown into the hole. The earth would swallow them, and they would never be seen again. But the hole was never satisfied. It demanded more and more sacrifices. Finally, the Wampanoag shaman sealed it using a ritual that cost him his own life. They covered the site with stones and marked it as forbidden ground, a place where no one should ever build or settle. Father Cristobal, in his Christian arrogance, had seen the warnings and ignored them. He believed that building a monastery on cursed ground would redeem it, that prayer and holy purpose would drive out whatever darkness lurked there. He was wrong. The construction of the monastery, the digging of the catacombs, had broken the shaman's seal. The hole had opened again, deeper and wider than before. And the first thing that crawled out of it was the door. Father Cristobal's entries became increasingly frantic as the weeks went on. He wrote about monks disappearing, about hearing voices from the catacombs, about finding handprints in impossible places, on the ceiling, on the inside of locked doors, on his own skin when he woke in the morning. He tried everything to close the door again, exorcisms, holy water, prayers in a dozen languages, even attempting to destroy the catacombs by fire. Nothing worked. His final entry was dated 1743, it spoke to me in dreams. It showed me what lies beyond. There is no heaven there, no hell, only elsewhere, a space between spaces where suffering is currency and hands are the coin. It wants to trade. It promises absolution for offerings, forgiveness for flesh. I am the abbot. I must protect my brothers. But God help me, I am tempted. My sins weigh so heavy. Perhaps one offering, just one, would be enough to. The entry ended mid-sentence. According to the records, Father Cristobal disappeared 3 days later. His body was never found, but his hands were discovered in the catacombs, arranged in a prayer position before a sealed door that hadn't existed before. I found something else in that office, a map. Father Cristobal had meticulously charted the catacombs, every tunnel and chamber, every twist and turn. And at the very bottom, in the deepest chamber, he'd drawn something and labeled it in Latin, Iannua Ultima, the final door. Below it, he'd written a single sentence, here is where Huatzika begins. Here is where everything ends. I studied that map for hours, memorizing every detail. If I was going to escape, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The catacombs weren't random, they were designed as a maze, a trap to funnel people deeper and deeper until they reached the final door. Every path, every choice, ultimately led to the same destination. But Father Cristobal had marked one passage differently. A narrow tunnel in the eastern section, partially collapsed, that led not deeper into the catacombs but horizontally, toward the forest. He'd written beside it, the shaman's path, the way of escape for those who serve. Blocked now. Dangerous. That was my way out. If I could clear that passage, I might be able to reach the forest without encountering the door directly. But I'd need tools, and time, and luck. As the sun set on my second day at St. Dominic's, I began to gather what I needed. A pickaxe from the tool shed. Rope from the stables. Candles and flint. I hid everything near the entrance to the catacombs, behind a loose stone where no one would think to look. That night, I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister's face, heard her calling my name, felt her hand reaching for me through the darkness. The door was in my mind now, showing me my guilt in endless variations, wearing me down, making me desperate for relief. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my cell. Slow, deliberate footsteps that didn't sound quite right, too many of them, as if several people were walking in perfect synchronization. I held my breath and waited. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Through the crack beneath it, I saw shadows moving, blocking the candlelight from the corridor. And then I heard the voice, Brother Nathaniel's voice, but wrong, speaking in that layered, multiplied tone that suggested many mouths speaking as one. "We know you're planning to leave," the voice said. "We know you found the map. We know you think you can escape. But there is no escape from guilt, brother. There is no path that leads away from what you've done. The only way forward is through the door, through elsewhere, through the offering." I pressed myself against the far wall of my cell, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. "Your sister is waiting for you in elsewhere," the voice continued. "She wants to see you again. She wants you to hold her hand, the way you should have held it when she was dying. She forgives you. She just wants to touch you one more time. All you have to do is make the offering. All you have to do is give us your hands, and you can be with her forever." I knew it was a lie. I knew the door was manipulating me, showing me what I wanted to see to lure me into its trap. But God help me, part of me wanted to believe it. Part of me wanted to think that somewhere beyond that door, my sister was waiting, ready to forgive me for letting her die. The shadows beneath the door moved closer, and I saw them, fingers, dozens of fingers, sliding under the gap, reaching for me. I grabbed my crucifix and held it up like a weapon, praying desperately, begging God to protect me from the thing that lived. Beneath his monastery, the fingers stopped. They curled back, retreating from the cross. And I heard something I'd never expected to hear from that terrible voice, fear. "Iron and faith," the voice whispered. "The old protections. The shaman used them. Father Cristobal learned them. You're remembering the old ways. That makes you dangerous. That makes you someone who needs to be claimed quickly, before you understand too much." The footsteps retreated, moving back down the corridor. But the voice called back one final warning: "Run if you want, brother. Hide in your collapsed tunnel. Crawl through the earth like a worm seeking light. But the door is patient. The door is everywhere. And when you're alone in the dark, when your candle gutters and dies, when your strength fails and your faith wavers, that's when we'll take you. That's when you'll make the offering, not because you choose to, but because you'll have no choice left." Silence returned to the monastery. But I knew sleep was impossible now. I had to move tonight, while I still had the courage. While I still believed escape was possible. I gathered my hidden supplies and crept through the darkness toward the catacombs. The monastery was silent, but it felt like a living silence, as if the building itself were holding its breath, watching to see what I would do. The trapdoor opened with a creak that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet. I descended into the catacombs, following Father Cristobal's map, making my way toward the eastern passage. Every shadow seemed to hide reaching hands. Every sound might have been footsteps following me deeper into the dark. I found the collapsed passage exactly where the map indicated. Rubble filled the tunnel, stones and earth packed tight, but I could feel air moving through the gaps, fresh air from the forest beyond. This was my way out. I began to dig. That night, I waited until I heard the chanting begin. Then I took a candle and went looking for the entrance to the catacombs. I found it behind the chapel altar, a trapdoor hidden beneath a rotted carpet. Stone steps descended into blackness that my candle flame seemed reluctant to penetrate, as if the darkness down there was thicker than normal, almost solid. The chanting grew louder as I descended, echoing off walls I couldn't see. The catacombs were older than the monastery above, perhaps older than the memory of whoever built them. The walls were carved with symbols I didn't recognize, angular and wrong, shapes that hurt to look at directly. Niches held bones arranged in patterns that suggested purpose rather than mere storage of the dead. As I ventured deeper, I began to notice something wrong with the bones. They all ended at the wrists. Hundreds of skeletons, perhaps thousands, all of them handless. This wasn't a catacomb, it was a trophy room. Every person who'd ever been thrown into Huatzika, every sacrifice made over centuries, their bones remained down here while their hands fed the door. The walls themselves seemed to breathe around me, expanding and contracting rhythmically, as if I descended into the throat of some vast creature. The temperature dropped with every step until I could see my breath misting in the candlelight. And everywhere, on every surface, I saw the handprints. Thousands of them, pressed into the stone as if the rock had been soft clay, frozen in gestures of prayer, of pleading, of despair. I followed the sound of chanting through twisting passages, my candle casting wild shadows that moved independently of the flame. The walls began to change as I descended deeper, the stone becoming older, more primitive, carved with symbols that predated any civilization I knew of. These weren't Christian catacombs. They were something far more ancient, something that had been waiting beneath the earth long before humans built their first fires. I passed through a chamber where the bones had been arranged into disturbing sculptures, human forms constructed entirely from handless skeletons, posed in attitudes of worship toward a central throne carved from a single piece of black stone. On that throne sat a skull, and in the skull's eye sockets, I saw movement, things crawling, things that might have been insects or might have been something far worse. Finally, I reached the chamber where the other monks knelt in a circle, their voices raised in that awful prayer. In the center of the circle stood Brother Thomas, and in his hands, no, that's not right. Thomas had no hands. His wrists ended in ragged stumps, barely healed, the flesh white and puckered. But there were hands in front of him, severed at the wrists, standing upright on their fingertips like obscene spiders. As I watched in horror, they walked in circles around Thomas, leaving bloody prints on the stone. And there was Brother William, tied to the altar stone, his hands stretched out on either side of him, wrists positioned precisely in those deep grooves I'd read about. His eyes were wide with terror, but he wasn't struggling. He'd been drugged, I realized, given something to paralyze him while leaving him fully conscious. They wanted him to feel everything, to be present for his own offering. But before the ritual could continue, Brother William's eyes found mine. And in them, I saw not fear, but determination. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the chanting, but I could read his lips, the passage. Dig. Escape. Tell them. He was sacrificing himself not just to the door, but for me, giving me time to find the way out while the monks were distracted with his offering. Brother Peter stood over William with an axe, its blade gleaming in the candlelight. Peter's face was serene, almost beatific, as if he were about to perform a sacred duty rather than a mutilation. We gather in the name of the penitent, Peter intoned. We offer what was offered before, flesh for time, hands for mercy. May Brother William's sacrifice sustain the door for another season. May his hands reach where ours cannot. May he find in elsewhere what he could not find in heaven. The other monks responded in unison, let the door be fed. Let the hunger be satisfied. Let the hands remember. Peter raised the axe. I should have turned away. I should have run back to the passage and started digging. But I was frozen, unable to move, unable to look away from the horror about to unfold. And in that moment of paralysis, Brother William looked at me one final time. He smiled, actually smiled, and mouthed one last word, "Run." The axe fell. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't stand there and watch this atrocity unfold. I ran forward, shouting, trying to knock the axe from Peter's grasp. But I'd forgotten about the hands, the severed hands that moved with terrible purpose around the chamber. They swarmed me instantly, dozens of them, crawling up my legs, clutching at my arms, pulling me down. Their grip was impossibly strong, and cold, so cold that my skin burned where they touched. I struggled, screaming, but they held me fast, dragging me toward the edge of the chamber where I could finally see it clearly. The door. The monk's prayer reached a crescendo, and the hands began to glow with a sickly green light. The air itself seemed to tear open, and I saw it, the door that Brother Nathaniel had written about. It wasn't made of wood or metal. It was made of absence, a hole in reality through which something vast and hungry was trying to push itself into our world. And, through that door, I could see elsewhere. It wasn't a place. It was a state, a dimension of pure want, of need so profound it had gained consciousness. I saw the souls of everyone who'd ever made the offering, their essences trapped in that space between spaces, stretched thin across an eternity of reaching and grasping and never, ever touching what they sought. They screamed without mouths, wept without eyes, prayed without faith. And their hands, oh God, their hands, reached back through the door endlessly, trying to pull others into their eternal purgatory. Brother Nathaniel was there, his consciousness split across 1,000 pairs of hands, each one experiencing its own private agony. He saw me. I felt his recognition like a physical blow. And I understood with sudden, horrifying clarity that he wasn't trying to collect more offerings for the door. He was trying to collect more companions for his suffering. The door had promised him absolution, but what it had given him was an eternity of almost forgiven, almost saved, almost redeemed, but never quite reaching that final release. The axe fell. Brother William's screams shattered the chanting, a sound so filled with agony and betrayal that it seemed to crack the very stones around us. His hands hit the floor with wet thuds, twitching and spasming as the nerves died. But they didn't stay still for long. The door pulled them in. No, that's wrong. The hands walked themselves to the door, driven by some terrible instinct, and disappeared into elsewhere. For a moment, everything fell silent. Even William stopped screaming, his mouth hanging open in shock. Then his hands came back. They emerged from the door changed, glowing with that same sickly green light, moving with purpose and terrible intelligence. They crawled to William, who'd passed out from pain and shock, and touched his face with a gentleness that was obscene in its wrongness. I could see his essence, his soul, his consciousness, whatever you want to call it, begin to leak out through the stumps of his wrists, drawn into those severed hands like water through a siphon. "It's done," Peter said with satisfaction, lowering the axe. "The offering is made. The cycle continues." But Brother Thomas was staring at the door with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "The door, it's not closing." He was right. Usually, according to what I'd read, the door closed after each offering, satisfied for another season. But this time it stayed open, and it was growing wider. The edges of that absence in reality were spreading, consuming more and more of the chamber. It's had too many offerings, I realized, my voice hoarse from screaming. It's grown too strong. It doesn't want to close anymore. It wants to stay open. It wants to come through completely. The monks looked at each other in rising panic. They'd been feeding this thing for decades, making their regular sacrifices, thinking they were controlling it, managing it. But you can't manage hunger. You can only feed it until it becomes strong enough to devour you. The hands holding me suddenly released their grip, not out of mercy but because they had a new purpose. All of them, hundreds of severed hands from decades of offerings, began crawling toward the door. They formed a living carpet of flesh and bone, pulling themselves up and through, building something on the other side, building a bridge, building a body. And then Brother Nathaniel came through. Or what had been Brother Nathaniel. His form was wrong, impossible, a writhing mass of hands and arms and grasping fingers, all of them growing from a central mass that might have once been a human torso but had been reshaped by elsewhere into something that hurt to perceive. He had hundreds of hands now, all of them taken from all the offerings he'd collected, and each one moved with independent will, reaching, grasping, pulling. "Brothers," he said, and his voice came from dozens of mouths hidden among the hands, "thank you for feeding me. Thank you for keeping the door open. But I don't need your offerings anymore. I've grown strong enough to take what I want." The monks tried to run, but the hands were faster. They swarmed over Peter, over Thomas, over the others whose names I'd never learned. I heard bones breaking, heard screams abruptly cut off, heard the wet sounds of flesh being torn and reshaped. And through it all, Brother Nathaniel laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard, empty and eternal. Thomas saw me then. His mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't his. Brother Nathaniel welcomes you, the voice said, speaking with dozens of tones layered over each other. He has been waiting for hands that still remember how to write. He wants his story told. He wants others to come seeking what he found. The door is always hungry. The door needs more offerings. The severed hands turned toward me as one. They began to crawl in my direction, moving with horrible speed across the stone. I ran. I scrambled up through the catacombs, my lungs burning, Brother Nathaniel's laughter echoing behind me. I could hear him coming, the sound of hundreds of hands slapping against stone in pursuit, getting closer with every second. I burst through the trapdoor and into the chapel, slamming it shut behind me and piling every piece of furniture I could move on top of it. It wouldn't hold. I knew it wouldn't hold. But I needed time to think, to understand what I'd witnessed and what it meant. The monastery around me was changing. I could feel it, the walls breathing, the stones shifting, as if the building itself was being absorbed into the door's influence. Through the windows, I could see the trees outside bending toward the monastery, their branches reaching like supplicating hands. The door wasn't just in the catacombs anymore. It was spreading, claiming this entire place as its territory. I ran to my cell and grabbed the journals, both Nathaniel's and William's. If I died here, someone needed to know what had happened. Someone needed to warn the world about what was growing in the darkness beneath St. Dominic's. But I didn't go to the collapsed passage. Not yet. Something William had said echoed in my mind, iron and faith. The old protections. I ran to the smithy instead, a small outbuilding I'd noticed behind the stables. Inside, covered in dust and rust, I found what I was looking for, iron stakes, the kind used for securing tents or marking boundaries. The Wampanoag shaman had used iron to seal the door. Maybe I could use it too. I gathered as many stakes as I could carry, along with a hammer, and descended once more into the catacombs. This time, I knew where I was going. This time, I had a purpose beyond mere survival. I could hear the ritual still in progress, William's screams echoing through the tunnels. Each cry cut through me like a knife, but I forced myself to move forward. His sacrifice was buying me time. I couldn't waste it. I found the eastern passage and began to work. The iron stakes, I discovered, could be driven into the stone with surprising ease, as if the rock wanted to accept them. I worked my way along the passage, driving stakes into the walls every few feet, creating a barrier of iron between me and the ritual chamber. As I worked, I felt the pressure in the air change. The chanting faltered, then stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard Brother Nathaniel's voice calling out, no longer. Multiplied but singular, almost human. What are you doing? It demanded. What have you done? I drove another stake into the stone, and I swear I heard the door scream, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass combined, a sound that had no place in the human world. The handprints on the walls began to fade, as if the iron was disrupting the door's hold on this space. You're cutting off the passage, Nathaniel's voice said, and now I could hear fear in it. Real, genuine fear. You're trapping us in here with the door. Without a way out, it will consume us completely. It will. Good, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. You made your choice. You fed that thing for decades. You dragged others into your suffering. Now stay here with it. Stay here forever. I drove more stakes, working faster now, feeling the door's attention turning toward me like a vast, malevolent eye. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the walls. My breath came in ragged clouds. But I kept working, sealing the passage section by section. Behind me, I heard them coming, the hands, hundreds of them, skittering through the tunnels like a tide of flesh and bone. They were trying to reach me before I could complete the barrier. But the iron was slowing them, burning them where they touched it, forcing them to find other routes. I reached the collapsed section and began to dig with desperate strength, pulling away stones, clearing the passage. Fresh air hit my face, cold, clean, beautiful air from the forest beyond. I was almost through. Almost free. A hand grabbed my ankle. I looked down to see Brother William's severed hand clutching me, its grip impossibly strong. More hands emerged from the darkness behind it, pulling themselves forward, reaching for me. And beyond them, I saw Brother Nathaniel's twisted form, that mass of arms and grasping fingers, squeezing through the passage I tried to seal. You think iron can stop me? His voice echoed. I've had 30 years to learn the old ways. 30 years to understand the barriers between worlds. The iron slows me, yes. It hurts me, yes. But it cannot stop me. Nothing can stop me. I am the door's favorite offering. Its greatest success. Its perfect servant. I kicked at the hand on my ankle, but more hands grabbed me, my other leg, my waist, my arms. They were pulling me back, away from freedom, toward the chamber where the door waited with its eternal hunger. In desperation, I grabbed one of the iron stakes and drove it through the hand holding my ankle. The hand released me with a sound like a gasp, and I lunged forward, breaking through the last of the rubble, crawling into the narrow tunnel beyond. The hands couldn't follow, the passage was too small, too filled with iron stakes I'd driven into its walls. But I could hear them scratching at the stones, trying to dig through, trying to reach me. But what haunts me most, what keeps me writing this even as I hear them scratching at my door, is what I saw in those final seconds before I fled. Behind Brother Thomas, in the shadows at the edge of the chamber, I saw him, Brother Nathaniel, or what was left of him. His body was twisted and wrong, limbs bent at impossible angles, his face stretched into a permanent scream. And where his hands should have been, dozens of other hands grew like grotesque flowers, hands of every size and description, all of them reaching toward the door, all of them still offering, still begging for absolution that would never come. I made it back to my cell. I barred the door. I've been writing this account for the past 6 hours as the scratching grows louder. The hands know where I am. I can hear Thomas, or whatever speaks through Thomas, calling to me from the corridor. Don't you want redemption? The voice asks. Don't you want your sins forgiven? All you have to do is make the offering. Just your hands. Just give us your hands, and we'll give you everything Brother Nathaniel was promised. We'll give you elsewhere, where all the penitent go to pray forever. The scratching is at my door now. I can see fingers, so many fingers, sliding under the gap at the bottom, feeling blindly for purchase. The crucifix on my wall has turned completely upside down. I'm running out of candles. When the darkness comes, I think the door will open in my cell. I think I'll see elsewhere for myself. And perhaps, if God is merciful, I'll die before the hands take me there. But I'm no longer certain God watches this place. I think something else does. Something that whispers promises through doors that should never be open. Something that collects the offerings of the desperate and the damned. My hands are shaking so badly now I can barely write. But I must finish this. Someone needs to know what happened at St. Dominic's. Someone needs to warn others to stay away from. The door just splintered. They're coming through. So many hands, crawling over each other, reaching for me. And behind them, I can see Brother Nathaniel, his body jerking like a puppet, his mouth moving in that endless silent scream. He's mouthing words at me. I can read his lips. Welcome, brother. Make your offering. The hands are on me now. They're cold. So cold. They're pulling me toward something opening in the floor of my cell, the door, coming for me because I learned its secrets. I can see elsewhere now, and it's not a place at all. It's a hunger. An eternal, consuming hunger that wears the shape of salvation. I'm sorry. God forgive me, I'm so sore. The journal ends there. When historians finally discovered the ruins of St. Dominic's Monastery in 1923, they found no bodies. They found no evidence that anyone had lived there since the 1770s. But in the catacombs beneath the chapel, they found something that made them seal the entrance with concrete. On the walls, written in what analysis later confirmed was human blood, were hundreds of handprints. Thousands of them, overlapping, covering every surface. And in the center of the largest chamber, they found an altar stone with deep grooves carved into it, grooves the exact width and length of human wrists. The archaeological team that made the discovery all died within a year. Different causes, heart attacks, accidents, one suicide. But each of them, in their final moments, reportedly held out their hands as if offering something to someone only they could see. The site remains sealed. The government claims it's because of structural instability. But local historians know better. They know that on certain nights, especially in autumn, hikers in that part of the Massachusetts wilderness report hearing chanting coming from beneath the ground. And sometimes, in the morning, they find handprints in the dirt around their tents, handprints with no arms attached, leading away into the forest, always heading west. Toward the ruins of St. Dominic's. Toward the door that Brother Nathaniel opened. Toward the place where the penitents still pray, and the offerings are never enough. His hands are still asking. And the door is always hungry. If you made it to the end of this story, you're braver than most. But I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Look at your hands right now. Really look at them. Do they feel like they're completely yours? Have you ever had that strange sensation that they're moving just slightly before you tell them to? That maybe, just maybe, they remember something you've forgotten. Brother Nathaniel's journal was real. The monastery was real. And somewhere in the Massachusetts wilderness, beneath concrete and bureaucratic red tape, the door is still there. Still breathing. Still waiting for the next person who comes seeking redemption badly enough to make the ultimate offering. The question is, would you? If your sins were great enough, if your guilt was crushing enough, would you place your hands on the altar stone and reach for salvation in elsewhere? Don't answer too quickly. The door has time. It's been waiting since before Brother Nathaniel. It'll be waiting long after we're all gone. And it's always listening for the sound of someone desperate enough to knock. Sleep well tonight. And if you wake up with scratches on your door that weren't there before, if you hear chanting from beneath your floor, if you find yourself dreaming of a door that opens onto nothing and everything at once, well, perhaps Brother Nathaniel has noticed you. Perhaps he thinks you'd make a good addition to the monastery. Perhaps your hands would look lovely in his collection. After all, the penitent are always looking for new brothers, new sisters, new offerings to feed the hunger of elsewhere. The door is always open. All you have to do is knock. But whatever you do, don't offer your hands. Don't make that bargain. Because once you've given them up, once you've made that dark promise, you'll understand the terrible truth that Brother Nathaniel learned too late. Some debts can never be paid. Some sins can never be forgiven. And some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The hands remember. The hands always remember. And they're still reaching, still offering, still asking, forever.